Good evening, Diane. It's so nice to see you and spend a Friday evening together virtually, but so connected, same city.
Same to you. I'm just going to click off of this so I don't see the
Go
message. There you go. Sorry.
Fabulous. No, it's all good. I feel like I'm always it's funny, I was reflecting on this just recently. I had a great supervisor once, and my favorite thing that she taught me was how to like really finish your day and go through this like checklist in your head while you hold your hand over the light switch, right? And then you have this mental point of, okay, did the whole thing, the lights off. I'm not going to think about this thing anymore. And I feel like just similarly now, and when I was getting ready to record with you, I was like, okay, is the phone off? Is the slides ready? Like, do we have all the pieces? And inevitably one gets forgotten. So I'll probably have to do that at some point in this conversation too, but it's part of rolling with it, which I love that we share in common, this desire to just kind of go with what's going on, right? React, have that true connection. And I'm so excited and grateful that I get to have this connection with you today.
Oh,
So
me
thank
too.
you so
I'm really
much for being
excited
here.
to talk with you as well. Yeah.
Yay. So before we get into the reason that we're here, I like to just do a little check-in. How has your week been? How is your evening going so far? Is it cold enough for you lately?
Well, I hate the cold weather, so it's way too cold for me. As soon as it turns September, I'm asking when is summer. So I am not a winter person at all. But yeah, it's been I'm waiting for spring, of course. But yeah, it's been a really interesting week. There's a lot happening in the world right now. And of course, I keep a close eye on a lot of it, especially the human rights aspect of it. So it's been a really interesting, exciting, and scary week for sure.
I think that just about sums up. I feel like almost every week in a certain iteration since probably, I mean, since the beginning of time, but especially since 2020, right? It's just one thing after another that our hearts are really burdened by. And I so appreciate the way that you tune in and can help us all to be aware so that we can hopefully play a productive role in some positive change, which takes first just knowing what's happening, right? And not looking away. And so that is going to be a cool theme, I think, tonight too, of our conversation and your work. But for people who don't know you yet and are just getting to know you, this is Diane, who is individual activist. And I discovered Diane, well, I discovered you through your work, and I'm so excited to unpack with you more of what it means. But I like to start back in the time capsule or back in history to understand a little bit of like childhood. Diane, were you always a New Yorker? Is this a later thing? Were you always passionate about these causes? How did you become such a vocal, like beautiful, creative person?
Oh my God. Going back like in the dark ages. No, I've not always been a New Yorker. I was born and raised in Chicago. And I grew up in Chicago. My family is still in Chicago. So, that was always my home base. And then I quickly moved. Once I started working, I moved to California and I lived in LA, I lived in San Francisco, and then I moved here to New York, which I quickly found was where my heart is and where I belong. And I've been here ever since, and I really love it, even though it's changed a lot. Some of the most exciting things about New York don't even exist anymore. So that's a little sad, but it still has a spirit that captures my spirit, which I always think is sort of a rebel spirit. I'm not sure, but yeah. I think people that would know me say I have a rebel spirit.
That's so cool. And I'm not surprised. But I am curious about these things that you say you saw in New York, maybe that are different now. Like, I love New York history and I love really minutia details of New York history. Like, what are the things that you look back on really fondly about New York?
I mean, the spirit of New York when I first moved here has changed a lot. And it's always going to change. The idea that artists don't live in the city anymore, meaning Manhattan. When you go to Soho, which used to be completely an artist community, it's now all retail, which is where I grew up in retail, worked in retail my whole life. But there's a sadness to that. You know, there's a sadness to see that the loft spaces that used to be owned by artists are now owned by celebrities. And then there are the places that are just so amazing that are not here anymore. Pearl Paint being one of them, you know, on Canal Street was just a paradise for anybody who was creative. You know, the squeaky floors, the 7 floors that you walked up and your feet didn't fit on the stairs because they were so small and creaky. So there's a lot of places that don't exist anymore. You know, and there's a lot of places that, you know, even in retail, I look at the world of retail and the sadness of it these days. You know, I miss the original Barney's on 7th Avenue and those types of places where not so much you went to purchase, but you went for inspiration. It was so inspirational, you know, the way they did everything. So there's a lot of creative places that are gone. And yeah, it makes me pretty sad right now.
I can understand that. I mean, I don't have the same backlog of rich experiences, but I was actually at the Barney's last night for the Louis Vuitton 200th anniversary exhibit is there right now. And I can remember even like just the contours of the walls and like what used to be in the space. And it's beautiful what they're doing for this moment in time to celebrate this anniversary, but it's not the same as having the department
I
store.
mean, that's LV. It's not Barney's. Barney's doesn't even exist anymore. So
Right. It's
yeah.
crazy, but you can I sitting in that shell or just standing there. I'm like, I remember when this was this beautiful oasis, right? Where you can dream and have these big ideas and get inspired. So I'm hearing you in that. You mentioned living in these different places and you mentioned briefly this background in fashion too. How were you when you were moving around a lot, were you still working in the fashion industry? When do you make a pivot toward this other type of work that you do? Like walk me through that if you would.
So you know, after school, I started working for a company that doesn't exist anymore in Chicago. And through that company, it was called iMac, and I'm really aging myself by saying this because no one knows what that is. But you know, I was you know, I worked there and I started out as a trimmer on the floor, which means a visual person. I actually started on the sales floor, but then I quickly moved to like the visual department. So it's the department that puts the windows in and does all the kind of stuff that you see, the mannequins and whatever. And, you know, I worked there for quite some time and I worked my way up to being the vice president of visual merchandising and moving to San Francisco. So, you know, you'll see my cats. They're just every time I'm not paying
So
attention,
sweet.
in and out. But yeah, so and through that experience, you know, it allowed me to work for many different companies. You know, a lot of high-end companies, everybody from Donna Karan to Burberry. You know, I went into store design. So it really was just a wealth of creative energy, and I loved every minute of it, honestly. And you know, I hadn't painted for a long time because everything was work. It was just all like traveling, you know, and working. And these past couple of years, retail has just been in such a slump. And you know, I've been consulting for years now with you know, big major brands. My last job was with Hourglass Cosmetics, which is an amazing brand. And what the consulting allowed me to do was just really be creative. So I wasn't working full time for these companies, but I was there as a consultant. And I found that so amazing because you're not so much into all the politics of the company, but you really can get into the creative of it. So, you know, I would do big presentations and work here in my studio to design things. And but lately it's been really quiet. And you know, I started doing street art in 2010. I think it was either 2008 or 2010 when the artist Ai Weiwei was taken in China. And I did a huge portrait of him out of sheer frustration because I didn't know what else to do. It was so frustrating. And I had been, kind of involved with him and, knew who he was and kind of had connection with his assistant and a lot of human rights activists in China. And when he was taken, it hit me that, well, I'm just going to paint his portrait and put the words missing, and when he was taken, every major museum did the same thing. I mean, in front on the top of the Tate Museum was the words Ai Weiwei missing. Here in New York, the Met. So it hit me that wow, you can really get a message out there without being part of a group, without like asking someone's permission, without doing any of those things that that you have to go through, these protocols that I'm used to at work doing. So that's kind of where I got back into art, realizing that, there's so many messages out there and so much going on in our world. And the streets are actually where people see the most creative things, even though they may not be realizing it. They're walking past something and they're like, oh, okay, what does that mean? So yeah, that's kind of how I got from like the working world every day of retail to really starting with street art. And I've been doing it ever since. Yeah.
Wow, what a cool just defining moment in your life, to be able to take this terrible thing that was going on and turn it into a almost like rallying cry. It sounds like for you to be like, okay, I have an active role in this actually, and I don't have to wait for someone else necessarily to tell me what that active role is going to be, or limit it in the ways that they feel it needs to be, have protocols put around it or something. So that defining moment and that person, had you been involved in activism in different ways before making it like an artistic expression? What was that like in your life? And had you been, I'm thinking about like where one's mind could be at that moment when you have this person that you're familiar with or acquainted with in different ways going through this thing. Part of me might be like, maybe you were always thinking about doing street art for this purpose. And like, then you're like, okay, now I'm diving in. Now it's worth the risk or the fear or whatever. And then the other part of me is like, well, maybe you weren't thinking about it. And all of a sudden, like this thing happening planted the seed. I would love to hear more about where you were at.
Well, it's sort of a long story, but as I said, I've always been kind of a rebel. I've always, even in fashion, I gave a lot of talks at FIT, and I would encourage people always to stop looking at your competition. Stop looking at at all the other designers, at all the other stores, and start looking at things that are normally not inspiration. So the idea that maybe you would, you look at a garment, for example, which can be beautiful, especially a designer garment. But what's more beautiful about it is if you turn it inside out and you look at all the handiwork that goes into that garment. For me, it's more beautiful inside out than it is the right side, the way you would wear it. And so I look at art like that too. Like I don't so much get inspired by a lot of the what other people are doing. I try to find things that are inspiration, even from the cement on the ground outside. And so, my way into human rights, I've always been very outspoken, but while I was working with Burberry, I went to China and I opened up many of the Chinese stores there, in most of the provinces, and I was able to really travel in China. And You know, my first trip to China was so inspiring, and it had nothing to do with human rights. It was the history. You know, I remember dragging when you go there, you have these minders, especially when you're working in business. And I dragged them to the Forbidden City. I said, I have to see this. It was in the middle of winter. I mean, it was just, and we were only there for an hour, which is absurd. But it just, like, that was a defining moment for me. And after seeing that, I went back to China every year in the summer for 7 years. And I met someone in China who became a really good friend of mine, a Chinese man who taught me a lot about Chinese history. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. And he has roots in kind of like the royal part of Chinese history. So his great grandmother was the Empress Dowager Anne. And I mean, I checked all this out. It was just amazing. But more importantly, he knew about Tiananmen. So for a young person to know about Tiananmen Square was really surprising, because it's banished from all the history books. They don't learn about it. And he also knew, his family knew a lot of the student leaders from Tiananmen Square. And so that was it for me. That was the jumping off point. And normally in my life, I would always be so connected to work and doing it the right way. I let this journey just lead me to where it was going to lead me. And I've never done that before. So it led me to meet making a very long story short, many of the top student leaders from Tiananmen Square, and Mr. Wei Jingshen, who was the godfather of democracy in China, and on and on and on. And the more I got into it, the more it just made total sense. And so I just really, fell into it, and I continued it. And I got involved with a group here called Students for a Free Tibet, and a lot of other organizations. And, it's just led me to where I am now. I happen to be one of the protesters that went in 2008 during the Olympic Games in Beijing, and do a protest on Tiananmen Square for Tibet. And my heart is there. My heart is for the freedom for those people. And so being involved in that now, it hit me when I got back here that there's so many things that need to be spoken about. There's so many issues. And so thus my work on the street can be very political, but it's also all about activism. And that really is, I think, the key to my art is it's like art and activism. So it's putting these kind of potentially surprising issues onto the street, whether it's the vote here in the US, whether it's about China. My new pieces, which are behind me, these are 3 of 18 faces of kids that I'm doing to bring attention to the school shootings that are just horrific in this country. And every time they happen, everyone is, shocked and upset. And then we go right back to living our lives and like it never happened. So that is the idea of putting these things on the street, is keep reminding people. My Black Lives Matter piece, for example, I did it a year after all the stuff died down, because I wanted to say Black Lives Matter is a movement, not a moment, to keep reminding people that it's not over. It's not over. And so what are you doing? You got out into the streets and protests, a lot of people for the first time ever, and you walk the streets, but now what are you doing? Are you doing anything? Are you doing anything to help? So, yeah.
Thank you so much for walking me through that. I mean, first of all, I'm just so impressed that you can explain it all so succinctly, because that's such an amazing, impactful, just life that you continue to live by. I think being, what I heard in that was just like the willingness to kind of show up and go with where you're led, right? And as a very like type A person, like that would be really hard for me. And it's something that I really admire and like to try to grow in. But I think too, it must have been, or I can imagine it would be so satisfying to see the different pieces of your identity kind of come together for these causes. Like you had been building up such a repertoire of experience in that corporate world, in the fashion industry, in like visual merchandising and literally putting visuals out into the world. And then to be kind of thrown into this really cool opportunity to learn about something that I think a lot of people don't know as much about as we ought to. And now putting that on our streets is just a really something that I am grateful to walk past on my commute to work and things like that, and to stop and think a little bit more about, which I shared with you when we were getting to know each other. I would love to hear a bit about, so I think I have a clearer vision in speaking with you and continuing to get to know you about the purpose behind your work and individual activists. But I would love to hear also about how you would describe maybe the style of your art, like the actual visuals of it. I don't have the words for it, but I'm so drawn to it.
So a lot of it has very, you can say that it looks like it has its roots in Cubism. You know, I studied art for a long time, and, you know, there's a lot of, I'm always drawn to the artists who are able to realistically do beautiful pieces, but then in their time, they took that realism and they made it into something else. And Picasso obviously is one of them, and he's known by everybody, you know, and it's sort of a cliche to talk about Picasso, but he was really honestly a true genius. He was able to look into a person's face, into a person's soul, and create a completely different world, you know. And yet he was able to draw realism to perfection. So I admire that. And I love the idea of taking things apart and looking at them from different angles, looking them from the inside out, not going with the norm. And I think in my, what I call my real work, which is my, you know, working in retail, I also did that as well. I think, you know, with my interpretation of windows, interpretation of store designs, it's that idea of what makes a person walk into a store and be drawn to the back of that store. What is it that essence of making a person look and also ask questions? And so my work on the street hopefully does that, by the style, which is not really Cubism, but it's a sort of a derivative of Cubism. It's a style that makes you look into a person's face and hopefully get an emotion. And I do a lot of faces and a lot of people within my work. So, you know, it's looking into the soul of what I'm trying to say. This piece down here is one of my first pieces that I'm kind of known for. It's called Stop Watching Reality TV and Think. And I did that years ago because I was so upset that everyone I mean, I don't even know where they are anymore because I never watched TV, was just enamored with all this reality TV. And thus, there were things happening in our country, in our world, that people were completely missing because they're worried about like what's going on with my nemesis, the Kardashians, and all that kind of stuff. You know, I mean, who cares what they're doing? Meanwhile, you know, our own country was being basically kind of, you know, I don't want to say taken over, but there was a thought process that happened. And I don't want to get too political, but, you know, our past 4 years were an example of that, where everyone has their eye off the ball of what's going on, and they're worried about all this other stuff. So that's really what this piece was about. And when you look at it, it's a little bit disturbing, but it's asking the question, like, you know, what are you doing? Like, please stop watching reality TV. Like, if you want to watch it, great, but be involved in something else. You know, what are you doing to kind of better the world, to pick your own issue, to pick your own cause? And I think that's, you know, one of the first times I used my name, individual activist, on my piece, because I thought, you know, every single person can be an individual activist. It's not just me. Just pick a cause and do one small thing, even if it's the tiniest thing. And again, like I'm very inspired by Ai Weiwei, who is to me the ultimate individual activist. You know, he's done so much for the cause of the Chinese people, yet he's never belonged to any major groups like Human Rights in China or none of that stuff. He does his own thing, and he was put in jail for doing his own thing. But he has his own mindset, and he doesn't let people stop him. And it doesn't take a big group to get things done. And that really hit me. That was kind of the turning point for me, to know that, you know, everybody can do something. We all can do something, and just pick whatever you're interested in, you know. And there's so many things out there, you know. We're not lacking for problems in this world. So, you know, I really think that I would love if one person got inspired to do one thing when they look at my Instagram or my work, then I feel really happy about that.
Yeah, I love the freedom that people can run with in what you're saying, of like, we don't have to care. I mean, we all should care just in general about our fellow humans, but the things that pull on our heartstrings the most are going to be unique to each of us. And I love that when we are taking in your work, it can just remind us, or call us to kind of pay attention to the things that are pulling on our hearts and inspire some action on it. My friend and I were talking about this the other day, that I was really burdened by something, and she was really burdened by something completely different that I hadn't thought about at all. Right. And so if the both of us weren't there being burdened by different things, and then using that to fuel each other up to go do something about it, like, the world would be a little bit sadder, because we wouldn't be moving forward together in a cool direction. And so I love that about what your work is doing. I want to come back. You mentioned Picasso and how I loved how you described how he can, like, look at someone and, like, just take out of their soul this whole world of things. And I have definitely seen how people and faces are important in your work. Are you looking at specific people and turning that into your work, or for you is it different than Picasso in that way? Are these people in your mind more than being real people? Like, what is that for you?
I mean, sometimes they're real people. Like I've done portraits of, I'm just looking over here, which you can't see, but Dr. Fauci, you know, to say thank you. So I've done realistic portraits, but, you know, like these faces here are an example of, they're kind of a collaboration of different faces that I've seen, or I'll pull a tear sheet. These 18 kids are 18 diverse kids. So they're from all backgrounds, all walks of life, to show that, you know, we are all these kids, no matter who they are, you know, have to live like this now in fear, basically. And so it involves all of us. It's not just white kids or black kids or, you know, Asian kids, it's everybody. And so I decided to pick 18 kids. And yes, I hope that when you look at these, and this one I'm just starting, like it's not finished, but when you look into their eyes, I hope you can look into their souls. I didn't want to make them completely sad, but there is a sadness to them. You know, there is the dripping eye. There is hopefully the eyes that kind of pull you in and say, you know, we are hurting and this is not right. You know, when I was young, you know, we would have fire drills, you know, I mean, and every school has fire drills. You know, you loved it because you got to go out of class and go outside and hang out with your friends. But these kids have to go through safety drills now, where there's a whole protocol where they are lights out, everybody silent, everybody run for cover, whether it's under a desk or in a closet, has to be pin quiet. The teachers have to go and lock the doors. I mean, it's a whole thing. And I think, God, if I had to go through that as a kid, I would be scared out of my mind, and I think it's unfair that kids don't just go through fire drills anymore, that they have to go through this, and that we value guns in this country more than lives. And so I hope these faces kind of show that kind of angst of, we're just kids, we just want to live our lives. And so when I put these on the street, I've gotten a lot of good feedback so far from this project. So
Yes. I think that's just awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. With all of these works, they hit on, topics that are so heavy. And I think that, that reality TV analogy is so wise that it almost has like a numbing effect, I think. Or, we just like seek things out, maybe that kind of, like you said, you lose sight of the prize, or you take your eye off of whatever you're supposed to be working on, because the thing you're supposed to work on is messy and it's super uncomfortable, and it leads to combativeness, at least in the interim, until we find a solution, right? Because everyone's coming at it from these different angles. And so it's much easier to flip on the Kardashians or flip on the Bachelor. And in some ways, like you said, you can have those things and they can be just your downtime with your friends, and you gab over it and it's energizing. But the dangerous part of it is, I think, the way you're describing it, of this numbingness. And so I love that in your work, it really does probe you to be like, let's actually feel something. Like, let's feel, at least for a moment, the weight of this, not in a way that makes us feel like it's over, there's nothing we can do, it's too big, but in a way that's like, oh, I want to know more so that I can do a little thing, because this is one person in front of me, this is one child's face, and I'm one person. And so I think it makes it not, I don't love the phrase bite size, but it makes it almost like digestible in an uncomfortable enough way that inspires you to do something a little bit more. And so that, I think, is great. But I'm curious too, at the same time, for you, I think you have this really cool awareness of a lot of things that are heavy at the same time. And so what is it like for you to find balance in that keeps you encouraged and hopeful, while you also want to spread the word about everything that we need to know more about than we do?
Mhm. Well, I mean, I have a small group of really good friends around me who keep me balanced, and my family, my sisters, my friend Molly, who is such a like genius, and she's somebody who, she also works in human rights. She has, a lot of times we don't see eye to eye, but we talk about so many amazing subjects. We talk almost every night, and for hours we just go off on, I mean, it could go from one thing to another. It's just amazing. So that keeps me really grounded. But I have to say, after these past 4 years, I literally, I stopped watching the news. I literally tuned out of everything. From somebody who, the 4 years, I'm not even going to say the name of the person in office, but, I every day was watching the news and watching what's going on and trying to get the word out there. And then when the vote was up, when the elections were up, I spent my entire time getting this vote campaign onto the streets, sending it out to other states, my work. So I just stopped watching. And, I literally did not know what was going on at all, which is completely unlike me. And just recently, I've noticed that I need to get back in, especially with what's happening in China right now, which is really exciting and scary at the same point. But I needed to turn it off because I was too involved in it. It was taking every minute, and it made me really anxious and in a lot of ways kind of unhealthy that I was so involved in it. And So stepping back from it really helped and gave me a more kind of refreshing look at it. And, my pieces were still asking questions. Like I did a piece, I don't know if you can see it down here, it's called Selfie or Selfless. So, like I went back into the streets and things, worked on things that really bothered me. So one of the things is this world of selfies, and especially here in New York, you see all these, and it's mainly women, I have to say, I'm sorry, girls, but, posing in front of every last thing, flowers and this and that. And I keep thinking, like, you have thousands and thousands of photographs on your phone of yourself. What are you going to do with those photos? Like, where are those photos going to be in like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? Why? And so it really hit me that, and on this piece, it says, what if one less selfie, one more selfless act? And it hit me that, like, if everybody would do one thing that's selfless for every selfie they took, our world would probably be kind of a better place, It really bothers me. And I notice it a lot because when, when you're putting up street art, or you're very aware of street art, many people are taking selfies in front of street art, So there's a place here in the city called Freeman's Alley, and it's kind of a safe place that we can post up all the time because it's out, police can't get in there, and it's like this alley, and it's just every amazing street artist in the world has posted up there, including a friend of mine, Badakau from China. And, and so they go in there, like a lot of times I'll be pasting up and there's all these people taking selfies. And it hits me like, do you realize what it took for that artist that you're standing in front of to get that art on the street and to make that piece, and would you ever acknowledge that person instead of just putting yourself in kind of these poses that are like, I don't know, they're like on the side, and that whole kind of thing going on. So yeah, so breaking away from the news and going back to these issues that are not so newsworthy is kind of what I did these past couple of years. And, again, like, this is newsworthy with these kids, but it's, well, I guess it is political, but it's a little less political than what I had been working on in the past.
Yeah, I think, newsworthy versus like life worthy, right? And I'm thinking still about your noticing the concrete that you mentioned earlier, right? Like, I love that. I feel like that's so it's a beautiful New York experience when we do stop and notice all those like random things. I was pushed up against the window of a subway car on the way home today and just like noticing like all the lines of track, and I was like, this is so amazing that we live in the city that is fueled by all these little pieces that come together, and so for you to just notice the selfie while you're in the street, that can spark a movement or a conversation or whatever, without having to look at the news that is just gut-wrenchingly unhealthy often. So I hear you in that. And I will pull up your work so we can talk about some of them. It's going to be a bit of a ricochet back first, because we're going to go to some of the fashion things, but it's a ricochet that I'm so excited about just because of how New York this picture is. So I would love to hear about what this project was for you, and what you contributed to this space.
So as I said, have worked as a consultant, a creative consultant for 15 years. So after I worked full-time, Burberry was my last full-time job, I started consulting for major brands. And so Tiffany called me because they wanted me to design a new Christmas for them. And, it's very, pretty and not typical of my work. But what I found out is that they had never used their blue, their Tiffany blue, in any of their Christmas trim, which was shocking to me. So,
Yeah.
um, when you think of Tiffany, you think of the elegance and the beauty and the history of that Fifth Avenue store, from, Audrey Hepburn to, all their amazing history. And the jewelry, of course, is just beyond over the top amazing. So you've got this just amazing stuff to work with. So I decided that we had to use the Tiffany blue. And so I was inspired, somewhat by Audrey Hepburn with these topiary trees that are very ladylike, that filled the first floor. And that was one of the vitrine windows that we had. We hired this amazing paper artist to do both the windows. So I designed the windows that year, which is kind of, I never thought about it until you brought it up, but like to be able to design the Tiffany windows one year was a pretty good thing. I guess I never thought about it.
So
But
cool.
yeah, and that was an inside vitrine, but the outside windows were all this delicate paper cut out work. It was just beautiful. And then, of course, when you put just one brooch that's worth like $50,000 in it, it just says everything. So, and then we went up with this trim on all their floors. And I had the carpet taken out and this spiral staircase, I think it's on the third floor, done with the Tiffany blue. So it was pretty impactful, and it was a fun project for sure. Yeah.
Gosh, what I would be speechless. I would have goosebumps, I think, every day working on it. I'm curious, just as a mega fan, like, did you have any special, after hours moments setting things up, or like cool behind the scenes little things to be in Tiffany's when no one else is there? I don't know. I can't imagine, but I'd love to hear what you remember from that experience that was kind of novel or sweet for you.
Well, as you know, visual and the visual both inside a store and the windows go in overnight. So, I'm used to that. In all the companies I've worked for, this kind of like you're in the store alone. But let me tell you, when you are in Tiffany's, you are not alone. The guards are there with you, and they are on every floor, and they are the kind of kind, watchful eye. And so that, I kind of guess I knew that that was going to happen, but it was really, interesting. And then, of course, like when you're working in ready to wear, you're used to just grabbing merchandise, like either from a stockroom or from, the floor. But here at Tiffany, you don't just grab the merchandise. So everything is signed out and, and double checked and triple checked and quadruple checked. And, when you bring those pieces into the window, you are not alone. Which is great. It's interesting because they get to see what we do, and we get to see how they, kind of guard everything.
Yeah.
There's also, and I'm not sure whether it's the largest diamond in the world, but there is one of the largest diamonds in the world that they own at Tiffany, and it's on the main floor, and you can see it, and it goes down into a vault every night. Like, we're talking major vault. So that was kind of, I don't even know if I was supposed to say that, but cut that out. That was interesting too, to know those kind of like behind the scenes details. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is so cool. What a
No, I
special.
said that.
You text me about it. We'll get rid of what we need to. But no, that's just amazing. And I'm I think it was so wise to use the Tiffany blue. That is so weird to me, or shocking, that it wasn't an essential thing always. But it makes me
They
curious.
do it now. They have a whole different, it's very modern there. This was a couple of years ago, but now they use their blue a lot. So they've changed regimes there. It's much more modern than it used to be, for sure.
Yeah, but this was, the cutting edge of that, which is so cool to be on the cusp of that change. When you would do these projects as a consultant, Is it varied? Do you know how much instruction you're given from the organization of what they're looking for or parameters, or do you go in like blank slating it? We're gonna use paper. We're gonna put this thing like, how does that work?
So, I'll, with Tiffany, I met with the team, obviously, and they have a full in-house visual team, store design team. The store design team wasn't involved, but their visual team was. And so I go in and hear what the project is going to be, what the scope of work they want from me. And then, obviously we know who Tiffany is, so how is that, they'll kind of give me like what they might be thinking, some kind of loose parameters. And then what I do is I come back here to my studio and I do all hand renderings of what it could be. I put big mood boards together. So basically I will put boards together for the windows, for the interiors, for the core tops, for the carpets. Everything gets a mood board. And what that is, it's like a ton of inspiration shots that are put together on a board. And then when I make that presentation, it gives them the opportunity to say, oh, I really like this, I don't like this. And then I go back with all their likes and put together the concept.
Wow, what a fun iterative kind of thing that you get to bring to life with people. So thank you for explaining that to me. So I'll go to our next thing here. I was so excited to incorporate this element too that we hadn't really talked about before in your work, but I'm excited to learn what this is.
So the first shot is that couch sitting up against the Bowery wall.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so I took that shot. Now, I don't consider myself a photographer by any means. I have a really good friend who's one of the top photographers here in the US, and that's the second shot you see there. But obviously as a creative, you get inspired by everything you see. And somebody had dumped a couch there. I don't know what that was. And I happened to be walking past the Bowery Wall, usually, and I don't remember the artist who did that piece, but it's usually done by pretty important artists. They commission them every 4 times a year, I think, or 3 times a year. And I don't remember who this artist was, but somebody had put that couch there. Like it looked like it was just dumped out of a truck. So I was walking past and I just thought, oh my God, that's like so amazing. So I just quickly took that shot. But, and I do some photography, but I'm not a photographer. Like I couldn't work like a real camera. It's more like the way I see things. And the second shot is from this series that I did with my good friend Lori Frankel, who is one of the top photographers here in the city. And we have been friends for years. And she is a photographer, and I, have worked in retail, and I've done some styling, and I do what I do. She does what she does. And, as creatives all these years, we got to the point where we're feeling really frustrated. With everybody now has an iPhone, everybody is an artist, everybody is a photographer, everybody is all these things now. But her and I have worked in these industries for years. So, when somebody buys an iPhone and they take a picture and then Apple puts it up on one of their billboards, it's like, what? So it's been a frustration. And so we said to each other, she lives in San Francisco, I live here. We need to go back to the lowest common denominator and find inspiration from that. And so we were in San Francisco and we went to the dump, okay, like one of these places, like a dump, and we started pulling garbage out. Just interesting things that we found. This particular shot was done actually here in New York, but our series has shots from a lot of different places. And we brought back all this kind of interesting garbage. And we went into her refrigerator that had a lot of like older food, let's just say, okay? And we started putting these compositions together of this idea of all of this garbage in the world that's just floating around. But then when you look at, I don't remember what the piece was in here. Was it, whether it was something that was rotting, and some vegetables that were rotting, and we put it together. And the idea is called recycled beauty. And so the idea was that, you know, that juice can is, or plastic thing is going to be around forever, but, you know, say a piece of fruit, you know, goes back to nature. And it was this idea of this juxtaposition of all this garbage, yet nature seamlessly goes back to itself. And you know, we have a whole rotting chicken in one and a dead bird in the other. And when we started to put these pieces together, they started to look like old Danish paintings.
Yes.
So thus was born Recycled Beauty. And you know, we were really humbled that every design magazine that we admire picked up this piece, and we have articles about Recycled Beauty in all the major design magazines like Frame, all these different things. And so, yeah, it was a great project. Yeah.
That's so cool. And I think just so rebel-ish to go to the dumps or wherever. And you mentioned a dead bird. Like, these are things that for the sake of the art, that's hardcore to me. That's very hardcore.
I mean, it was not like, I had that dead bird in my freezer for a while because I was waiting for her to come back here to New York. So I literally had a dead bird in, like, wrapped in a lot of plastic, but he was in my freezer for a long time.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And sometimes we would shoot, like, on my Instagram page or on one of my pages, you'll see like our whole setup by my window in my living room. And we shot a lot of it on my ironing board. Okay. So it was just, I mean, you would never know looking at these shots, like how it was all set up. But yeah, it was a really fun project.
They're so cool, and they are just so beautiful. And I love I think one of the phrasing in like your portfolio was just this finding of beauty in ordinary contemporary things. And I can see that so clearly here. And I think it just adds a little bit of like excitement and joy to life when you stop and notice it. Like, for me, often it's the pigeons and the way that they're just like hanging out on the sidewalk. Like, I'm so enamored and so satisfied by it. Or, you know, how the garbage is assembled. It's just like, wow, like it's the right way. Or the couch is more evident, maybe, or accessible, as a form of beauty against that wall that it's like paired so well with. But it all does have these beautiful elements. And I'm glad that they're being shown so that we can see that spark of joy.
It was like the surprise of walking up to that or walking upon it. Like, it was, I don't think it was planned, you know, and it was just like, oh my God, that's like so perfect.
Yes. Oh, completely. 1000%. So definitely if anyone's listening and hasn't been noticing, please stop and see the random things that are put together that are just too good to not enjoy, to not experience. This is part of that work you were talking about earlier, right? With the children, or is that, I'd love to hear more. Am I thinking of this one the right way?
Yes.
Yes.
So this is these are the second. So I'm doing 18. So this is 3, 4, 5, 6. So what you see in this photo, you'll see some copy on them. When you actually look at the work, they don't have copy on them. And the reason I'm doing this way, on the street, they're going to have this copy, this very to the point copy. And the first copy on the first 3 was, it says 3 more children, 3 less guns. And this one says schools for learning, not for drills. So on the street, they're going to have this very heavy copy on them. But they're also available. And I have a really good friend who's a curator who's interested in showing these in an exhibit. I think that one of the things I've learned, because I don't really think about the sellability of my work ever, I think of the message. So as an artist, you do have to kind of think about the sellability of the work. So they're available either with the copy or without the copy. And if someone wants to buy a piece and wants the copy on it, it definitely can be, but individually, the copy doesn't make sense. You know, like the first piece says schools, not. And it's more for the street to get the word out there. So this is a Native American girl, a white boy, and an Asian, a Japanese boy. And I'm hoping that their eyes and their faces, while not feeling horribly sad, are allowing you to look inside and see that there is a bit of terror. You know, there is a bit of being afraid. There is a bit of something that makes you feel off about it, so that you're not completely comfortable looking at these faces, you know, where you would look at a cute kid's face. These are not cute. There's a message inside their eyes that that I hope comes through.
Absolutely. I'm curious about the materials that you're using in these works. Is this like I'm like splattered paint or spray paint or marker combination? Or how are you bringing these kids to life?
So they're all on canvas. So you can see I paint a lot on unframed canvas. And the reason I do that is because I love the rawness of it, especially because my work goes on the street. So I do not want it to be precious. And of course, I have painted on stretch canvas before. I just had an exhibit in the spring where I was asked to paint on canvas, which is on framed canvas, but I kind of love the rawness of it. I love the fact that when I tear it, there are these threads. It feels, for me, not precious, and it feels kind of the street. So, and then the paint is acrylic paint and spray paint, and I use a lot of materials that would be on the street. So there is, when you see like a lot of graffiti around, a lot of people use this paint called Crink, and it's a sponge tip, paint that doesn't come off. So I use a lot of this. So I want that feeling on the street. Like I don't want to go away from that. I love this kind of like almost kind of like dirty, raw, the streets of New York, like, you always want to come home and take a shower. I want that feeling of that grit, the grit of the street.
I love that. Is canvas a typical material for someone who's making work on the street? Like I hadn't thought about it or realized that canvas might be used.
Well, I'm what's called a wheat paster. So what I do is I finish these pieces and then I photograph them. I have them printed out and then I wheat paste them up.
Okay.
So a lot of people, like you'll see graffiti artists, and they obviously spray right on the street, either graffiti lettering or full pieces of art now. And they'll use spray paint, they'll use Crink, they'll use all different materials. But for me, I probably would never put a real piece like this up on the street because someone would just either paint over it or take it or whatever. So I have them printed out and then I wheat paste them up.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Um, let's see. And these are some of the other ones. I think we saw maybe a taste of the biggest one here on your wall behind you too, but I would love to hear anything you have to share about these works.
So, yeah, I talked about Stop Watching Reality TV. That in reality is an 8 foot by 5 foot canvas that I have rolled up somewhere here. So it's a huge piece. And so here's an example of how by wheat pasting, you can put it anywhere. All of these pieces are big pieces. But that one is really huge. So, and you can have them printed out any size. So, yeah, that frame is actually a frame that is across from the Bowery wall on Bowery and Houston. And it's just a frame that company used probably for a menu or something when it used to be a restaurant. But I love the idea, like, why couldn't it become the most amazing frame for street art? So I've been having my piece there for a couple of years now, and people paste over it all the time or try to rip it off. And I keep putting it back there like it's my own little frame. And I think when I put it up on my Instagram, I said, when you see a frame, use it. So it's this idea of like, yeah, why not? The middle piece is my piece called GMOs Are Killing Us. And that also is a huge canvas. And again, it's just, to bring the idea that, like, what the hell are we eating? I did that piece, I don't know, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, to bring, the idea. And I always put it up like in front of grocery stores and stuff. Like, are you buying food that's organic? Are you thinking about it? What are you putting into your body? So yeah, that was that piece. And then the We All the People of America Vote. And so this was a huge campaign, and I did many pieces around the vote campaign. The idea that, here in America, for many people, their vote is trying to be taken away from them. And we have absolutely the right to vote. I don't care whether you are rich, whether you're poor, whether you're Black, whether you're white, what color you are. It is your right as an American to vote, and you cannot let anybody take that right away. You can't tell them that, you can't get in this line, or you can't put your ballot into a mailbox because they're taking mailboxes off the street. You have the right to vote. And so this was one of a number of pieces that I put up, including just the word vote on the street. Like, I did it like a number of times to get the people to, to say, especially young people who didn't vote a couple years ago. Now, this past election, they came out, especially this primary, they did come out because they're waking up, because they're seeing like what happens when you don't vote. So that's kind of the whole purpose of this, is just you're walking past and you're like, showing that all of us need to vote. It shouldn't be, we should not be impeding anyone's vote in this country, anyone.
Yeah, no, I love the immediacy and directness of that one and that message. And I also love that the one in the middle with about the GMOs and stuff. It doesn't say it explicitly, and it's like very pretty to look at. It just kind of brings you in.
You have to look at it closely.
Oh, sorry. Well, but even so, right? You're walking by and maybe you're at a distance still, and you're just like kind of drawn closer, and then you get that kapow. Like, this is, about something deeper than just like this person with these cool features. Is either one of those like a direction that you're trending in, or do you feel like with the message you're thinking about, do we want the words bigger or the words smaller? Like, how intentional is that? How feeling driven is it? I just would love to hear.
So in both the GMOs and the Stop Watching Reality TV, you see that a copy is very small. So the reason is because you're drawn to the face and you need to get up pretty close to it. I mean, on the big one, the copy is actually quite big, but when it's printed out, the copy is small. So you're drawn to the face, and then you're almost compelled to read the copy. It's just like we read everything, you know, like when you see something and then you see there's letters to it, you want to read what that says. So those two are kind of almost intentionally done that way. So the copy kind of fits into the piece. It's like part of the face. With the vote, the copy is very, very in your face because obviously it needed to be. Yeah.
Yes, very cool to be flexible with that for the purpose behind the work. As I kind of abstract back out now, and thank you for diving into those individual pieces with me. It was so fun and so powerful. I am thinking about some phrasing you used of like the street as the new gallery, right? And I think that, you know, in the fashion world, you have that in one sense of the windows that are passing by, people are passing by and getting drawn in by. And then now literally on the street, you have it in another way entirely. I would love to hear more about that, what that phrasing means to you.
So for years, I have gone to galleries and museums and studied art, you know, and you obviously are inspired by artists. You see the different techniques of art. You get to learn art, you know, in that way. But how many people are really ever allowed to go into those galleries with their own work? You know, and when you look at people like Basquiat years ago, who obviously was so talented, and you know, he didn't have the opportunity to go into a gallery, so he became a street artist. And you know, for me, this idea that why should anything stop you from making a statement, from showing your work? I feel so humbled to be part of this street art community here in New York, and that so many have embraced me, because you know, it's a whole series of people, from spray painters to graffiti artists, and they're all so talented in their own way. And when we all come together on the street, it's really amazing. It is a gallery in itself, absolutely. And there's so many different mediums, from wheat paste, graffiti, there's stickers. The other day, somebody tagged me in a post because I now have stickers with all this wall of stickers, and you look at it and it's just like you can't stop looking at it. So it is a gallery. It's a gallery that anybody can see, that anybody can appreciate art, whether you are a homeless person, whether you're just walking, whether you're a business person quickly walking and something catches your eye. It is a gallery, and to me, it's the most important gallery because it is free. And people don't have to pay $25 for a day of like walking through a, you know, fancy gallery. All you have to do is just walk outside, you know,
Yes.
inspired, right?
I love that. And I love just I think the way that you're describing the gallery, so much of it I'm hearing hinges on like the relationship of the works to each other, right? Or that being a collaboration in itself. I think that's so energizing to think about when I'm looking at any piece on the street. I'm looking at it in the context of all these other pieces. And that is shaping the relationship I'm having to the work and to the city and to the moment. And that is so cool to be part of that whole mix.
Composition that comes together seamlessly and unintentionally. So, you know, again, like somebody, you know, when they see your pieces, they tag you in it on Instagram. And then like a lot of times it's my piece up with all these other amazing artists from New York. And that itself becomes a whole different piece. So it's this composition of all these different artists coming together unintentionally to make this beautiful composition. It's really amazing. It is. I
So
think.
cool. Oh no, I love it. It gets me excited every day, as you know, to be here and be walking around. And so I'm certainly grateful for it as a resident of this city. I'm curious to hear in your words, what the responsibility is of someone who's showing up to the public art scene versus someone who is creating maybe for a more explicit purpose of placing it in a gallery. Would you say that they do have a different responsibility to the work, to the people, to the message, to anything? Like, is there a difference?
You mean the viewer?
So the artist whose work is going to be in the public versus the artist who's maybe making for the gallery, do they have a different responsibility? Do they have a different set of considerations? Or wherever you want to go with that. But you have my wheels turning about the person who's in the traditional gallery versus in the new gallery.
I mean, I would say that there's a freedom. You have a freedom to decide where you want to put your piece, to decide, what your piece is going to be. You don't have to fit into any kind of constraint, or this is what the exhibition is going to be. It's going to be about this. You have the freedom to just put your piece out there. And one of the things about street art that is both exciting and exasperating is you can put a piece up one day and the next day it's gone. So it could be sprayed over, it could be wheat pasted over, it could be torn off the street. And that is the reality of street art. And it's hard to get used to it first because you do spend money and time doing this. But it is part of it. There is, what is the word? There's a fleeting presence to it. So it could be there, or it could be there for a long time. Mainly not, but depending on who the artist is and what the piece is about. There's a George Floyd piece by this artist. His name is going to escape me now, starts with an F, but his piece has been up there for years, ever since George Floyd died, and it never gets sprayed over. And that is a respect level from all the other artists and people who do things. Feudalism, his name is. And so I put pieces up and the next day they're gone. So you just have to kind of get used to it. And obviously in a gallery, you that doesn't happen.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. But I think it challenges us as humans, right? Something that I personally feel really motivated in or convicted by is like just holding on to things a little bit looser, like material thing, tangible things, right? For you, it feels really evident to me that your purpose is in this bigger message. And so even if it's reaching 3 people before it gets teared down, like for you to keep hinging your brain to that endpoint versus the tangible things staying there longer, it's like a really cool way to just keep evolving and checking in with what our motivation is
Yeah.
and being that bigger thing. I think that's so humbling and so cool. What a great exercise, right? As we can, are abstracting out and wrapping up, and it's been so sweet to spend this time with you learning from your perspective. I would love to hear about why using art as activism continues to matter. What keeps inspiring and motivating you to power through the the possible brevity of it, the scariness of like vulnerably putting your stuff out there, the politicization of the whole thing. What keeps helping you to show up?
Well, I mean, I'm going to talk just recently for this past week and what's happened in China. As the Chinese people are speaking out against the Uyghurs that were killed in the fire because China has cracked down, has a zero COVID policy, which is absurd. And, for many, many years, Chinese people obviously are not allowed to protest or make their will known basically since Tiananmen Square. And now people are coming out in every province of China, and there's been huge protests. So of course, because that is a cause that I believe in, day before yesterday, I did a piece for that. And it's gonna go up on my Instagram tomorrow. It's very different than, it's not a painting. It's very different than what I normally do, but it's very to the point. So people, because they're not allowed to protest, they're not allowed to bring signs, like picket signs. So what they did is they came out with blank sheets of paper. And it was the most powerful thing I think I've ever seen.
Wow.
Thousands of people are standing with a blank sheet of paper. Because how could they stop them from holding up nothing? Okay. So I just did a piece and I put it, I sent it out to my, to the people that I know, the lead, some of the leaders from Tiananmen who are still, working on the causes, the artists, there's an amazing Chinese artist, Badakao, who does such amazing work. So that is, these things pop up like you don't expect it. I did some pieces for boycotting the Beijing Games this past year about the Uyghurs and Tibetans. And, as things happen, things keep happening. So I never really get a rest to say, oh, I really just want to paint something kind of like out of the ordinary, And so this week has been this piece about the protest, and so I want to support as much as I can, for sure.
Yeah, that's can understand what you're saying. There's always something, right? That it sounds like for you that inspiration and motivation just naturally bubble up, because how could they not, right? When you care so deeply.
One thing you said, how does art and activism go together? And I say to you, how does it not?
Mhm.
So I always think, like, if people are speaking out, if artists don't speak out, who's going to? If you look through the history of art is all, not always, but many times about activism, about the what's happening in that day, in that time, to make a statement or make people think. And so for me, art and activism are like this. There's no separation for me.
Yes, I love that. And that's so wise. Are there lessons that you have learned along the way so far that you think someone else who's trying to learn more or engage more or create more or just exist more, deeply, that you would like to share with them?
So meaning a specific person?
Any, wisdom that you have or lessons that you have accrued that anyone who listens to this, you would like them to know.
I never see myself as having any wisdom at all. I don't see myself that way, because I kind of shoot from the hip, and a lot of times it's either listen to or not listen to, mainly not listen to a lot. But I think my work is from the heart, and I would encourage everybody, whether you think you're creative or not, you are creative. You have some creativity in you. And so I encourage people to explore that, whatever it is. It definitely doesn't have to be painting. It doesn't have to be photography. It could be anything. And that one little grain of creativity can just blossom into like things that you can't even imagine. So that's what's really happened to me in my life, especially kind of letting go and letting it take you where it's going to lead you. I highly recommend that. Like whatever you're doing, like even if like you're going for a job that you think you can never get in a million years, just go for it, because they can only say no.
Right.
Yeah, right.
That's one of my favorite like behavioral health kind of exercises, right? Go to that worst case scenario, right? And if you can make a game plan for the worst case scenario, then go for it. Like,
full of yourself.
why not? You'll learn a lot. It'll be good for the next improv class. I mean, just so you can find ways to make it into something that is useful, regardless of whether it's the outcome originally intended, right? And just finally, what are you really looking forward to right now? That could be like a warm cookie tonight before bedtime, or something more seismic related to your work, not related to your work, anything.
Um, Gosh, that's a really deep question. Probably just hoping that our world can calm down a bit. You know, every day there's something. And I mean, this week was just beyond, both here in the US. You know, yesterday we saw somebody that everybody knows just speak about deplorable things, you know, of Nazism. And I want that stuff to stop. Like, I want us to come together and like understand each other as much as we can. Try, I don't know, like I keep every day, like I say, when is the crazy gonna stop? You know? So I just want a more quiet world where we can enjoy the beauty of our life, the beauty of art, the beauty of where we live. Um, yeah, I know that probably makes no sense, but
No, I'm keeping pace with you, or trying my best to, but I think that's a beautiful thing to wish for. And I think, I'm on the same page as you. We're kind of coming full circle now, because I'm thinking about wintertime and I don't like wintertime at all either. I mean, I like one snowfall, a lit up beautiful tree in the distance somewhere, but for the most part, I'm generally uncomfortable. But I think when I think of peace and quiet, like some of the most peaceful, quiet days, at least in New York City, I think are like, right after a snowfall, or when it's so cold that no one wants to be outside. And so maybe even if we don't get to the ultimate peace in the near future, we can get some little tastes of peace in this season. And I'll be excited for that with you.
quiet moments where your creativity can really blossom, I think.
Yes, it's so true. So maybe in even our homes, we can make some quiet moments just to get to be with our thoughts, to see what things are going to bloom up from them, as you have shared about, which I am very personally encouraged by. So it's been such just a lovely time with you, Diane. I'm so glad that we got to do this. I'm so glad you were open to trying this with me. I'm really excited to share your work and your story.
Well, thank you so much. I feel so humbled that you would ask me to do this. And, you know, I really appreciate that you um, notice art on the street and that you are so aware of all these things. And it's just really heartwarming to know that people are doing that. Thank you so
Thank
much.
Oh, thank you.